Okay, so if you have watched many of my past videos or followed me online for any amount of time, you probably know that I have what is called a non-traditional background when it comes to being a software engineer. I used to kind of feel weird about this and try and hide it and try and hide the fact that I'd gone to a coding boot camp. Now that I'm several years into my career, I'm a lot less insecure about that, and in fact, I think it is really an advantage and gives me a different way of seeing things that is really helpful in the workplace. And so I wanted to talk about that today. So we're going to talk about why my liberal arts background helps me as a software engineer. And specifically, we're going to focus on three things: communication, critical thinking, and versatility. So let's get started. Okay, so I would say that the most important skill in any workplace, software engineer or not, is going to be communication. This has come up time and time again during my career as an engineer, and that the people who are able to communicate written and verbally the best end up going the furthest, end up having the most effective teams, end up accomplishing the most, end up being able to marshal people towards a common goal, because communication is a key part of doing all those things and in just having a job in general and being part of a team. The reason having a liberal arts degree helps in terms of written and spoken communication is the nature of the coursework. So I went to a small liberal arts college called Wofford, which is about 1,600 students, or at least it was when I went there, and the vast majority of my classes were seminars or classes where there was a ton of reading and writing. And that's kind of the idea behind liberal arts, right? It's like a well-rounded education based in the humanities. And so when you take humanities courses, that ends up being just a lot of reading and writing, and often seminar style classes where you're discussing. I can't tell you how many papers I wrote during college and how many times I had to really fight to express myself clearly. And those skills carry over into the workplace, even in informal communication like Slack. I would say especially in informal communication, and especially now that remote work is more of a thing, communication becomes more and more important. And it's really easy to step on someone's toes or say the wrong thing kind of by accident and be a little bit sloppy, whether it's Slack or email or drafting a memo, drafting a proposal. All of those things call for really precise and clear language, and I learned how to write that way in undergrad. On the spoken side, I mentioned that I had a lot of seminar style classes, and so if you think about having maybe a participation grade for speaking, which I had a lot of the time, the important thing is that you are making your point, you're referencing the text, and you're being clear about what your stance is. And so it's not kind of an argumentative thing, it's more of an expository thing, but those skills also carry over, as you might imagine. If you're in a meeting and the team is debating what the best course of action is, if you have a definitive opinion, then you can make your case based on whatever the evidence is. And so those skills from the seminar classroom transfer, in my opinion, directly into the boardroom or the meeting room. And so I use those skills every week, almost every day. And I think that communication is just absolutely paramount, especially now that so many of us are remote. And I'm thankful for the formation I had as it pertains to communicating. Okay, second, I mentioned critical thinking. So this I heard a lot when I first got to campus as a freshman, and I didn't really know what it is. Like, what is critical thinking? It sounds kind of like a buzzword, kind of like synergy or something. I don't know. But basically, the point is being able to absorb, in my case, a text, because I have a Bachelor of Arts. I didn't mention I was a Spanish major undergrad, and so I did a lot of reading and writing, like I mentioned. And so in that sense, critical thinking is going to be analyzing a text or having a discussion in class and being able to drill down past just the surface level and being able to, for example, do a close reading on a text and find deeper meaning, or think about the context around, say you're learning history, why certain things happened, being able to, if you're in an English class, think about the time in which the text you're reading was written and how that might influence what you're reading. So it's basically, in my kind of informal words, going beyond just the surface level and applying more contextual reasoning to the things that you are seeing and hearing. This also goes in the business world. You may have heard the term mental models, which is like very hot, and especially the circles that I follow on Twitter and everything, but I kind of think of a mental model being a kind of critical thinking. It's basically like taking a lens and applying it to situations and trying to discern like what is the deeper motivation, what is really driving what's going on here. And so, for example, a famous one from Charlie Munger would be looking at incentives. Like if you're wondering why are people behaving the way they are, look at where the incentives are and perhaps if the incentives are misaligned. And so that's just one way of practicing critical thinking, but you can see how this would come into play in a work context, like figuring out, for example, if you're working with clients, what is really driving the client? What is their true goal? What are their fears? Even without them necessarily having to say that, you can see how that would be super valuable. And it's something I feel that I don't do perfectly, but I'm able to bring to the table because of this training that I had in undergrad and learning how to do critical thinking, learning how to discern what are people's motivations, what are the true forces that are driving the events that I happen to be observing at any given time. And I'm really, really thankful for that as well. So that is critical thinking. The last point is versatility. So another thing that you hear a lot when you're either looking at going to a liberal arts college or once you're already there is that the point of a liberal arts education, or one of the points, is to make you well-rounded. And I think that it does do that, and it's also really valuable in the workplace because you end up having to do often a lot of different things. So, for example, even though I'm a software engineer, I do a lot of interviewing, I sometimes am in sales calls, I do management, and so there's a lot of different things going on, and having this kind of well-rounded formation in undergrad makes me more versatile and able to jump in ideally to a variety of different situations. I prefer a dynamic work environment. That's why I like working in an agency. Not that product companies can't be dynamic, but I like a lot of variety. And so it's kind of no surprise in that sense that I ended up going to a liberal arts college. But a lot of what people talk about is getting the well-roundedness. So, for example, where I went to school, as part of our general education requirements, everyone took a foreign language, everyone took 2 semesters of science, everyone took a couple English classes, everyone took a philosophy class and a religion class, and on and on. So you get the point. The whole point is to have kind of a broad base by which you can approach the world. One of my favorite books, or maybe my favorite absolute book of all time on this topic, is called The Range. And it is all about how having broad experience enables you to synthesize information across disciplines and is actually more valuable than hyper specialization in the way that the economy is these days. And so he has all these different examples about Nobel Prize winners who dabbled in areas that weren't their typical study and ended up discovering things, and people in business who ended up applying stuff from the sciences to solve their particular problem, and on and on. I've actually done a video about that, about how it inspired me to work on side projects. And I also use it in my personal brand, for example, like all the blogging I do, the writing a Twitter thread. Like if you have a strong command of language, you're going to be able to write a really punchy Twitter thread that gets a lot of engagement. And so you see this popping up all over the place. I think it's really, really important. And so the well-roundedness is kind of another part. So these are 3 advantages, or maybe formations, that I think my liberal arts degree has given me, and 3 ways that I think that they help me as a software engineer. I hope that's inspiring to those of you that maybe have a non-traditional background or maybe came from the humanities like I did. It doesn't all have to be getting a CS degree. I think there's a lot of value in the varied perspectives as well. And so I would encourage that. If you're interested in more of my thoughts about being a software engineer, life as a developer, developing your career, and general self-improvement, then feel free to subscribe. And otherwise, I will see you in the next one.